Welcome back everyone to the Energy and Atmosphere module of our course. This section in LEED is worth more points than any of the others, reflecting the environmental impacts due to energy use. Energy has emerged as a critical economic issue and a top priority for policymakers. Unsustainable patterns of energy supply and demand have serious impacts on everything from household budgets all the way to international relations. Buildings find themselves on the front line of this issue, consuming approximately 39% of energy and a whopping 74% of electricity used every year in the US. Studies continue to show that well-designed buildings and land use offer some of the most cost-efficient opportunities to save money while reducing pollution such as sulfur dioxide and mercury, as well as greenhouse gas emissions. Efforts to address energy through green building focus on two interconnected elements. First, we have reduction in the amount of energy required. This is done through integrated design and addresses orientation, building envelope, materials, systems, and other strategies. Secondly, we look at reducing the impacts from the energy that we do use. This is through renewable energy, as well as refrigerant management. Tied into both of these strategies is ongoing energy performance, or commissioning and verification, to ensure that buildings continue to operate as they were designed. Now, another concept here is the analysis of whole building lifecycle cost, which is central to green building practice because it provides a framework for understanding the trade-offs between the first costs and those long-term operational costs of HVAC and other energy-using systems. LEED encourages project teams to use simulation models to quantitatively analyze the trade-offs and identify cost-effective energy-saving strategies. This saves money over the life of the building, saves energy, and reduces greenhouse gas emissions and other environmental impacts. We see here the prerequisites in the energy and atmosphere category. We have fundamental commissioning and verification, minimum energy performance, building level energy metering, and fundamental refrigerant management. As you'll see here in just a second, each of these prerequisites has a corresponding credit to recognize going beyond these prerequisite requirements. And here's our credits. We start with enhanced commissioning. Additionally, and you'll notice there's a lot of points here, optimizing energy performance. In addition to advanced energy metering, demand response, renewable energy production, enhanced refrigerant management, and finally, green power and carbon offsets. First, let's kick it off with a definition. Commissioning. This is the process of verifying and documenting that a building and all of its systems and assemblies are planned, designed, installed, tested, operated, and maintained to meet the owner's project requirements. And here's our prerequisite and credit, dealing directly with commissioning. We have prerequisite fundamental commissioning and verification, and we'll take a look at these requirements now. But the intent behind these is to support the design, construction, and eventual operation of a project that meets the owner's project requirements for energy, water, indoor environmental quality, and durability. And the credit intent is quite similar, and it's to further support these efforts. At the prerequisite level, project teams need to, first of all, develop an OPR, or Owner's Project Requirements, and the BOD, or Basis of Design. Additionally, they need to designate the commissioning authority, often abbreviated CXA, by the end of the design development phase. The next piece of the prerequisite requirements is to create an operations and maintenance plan. And we'll see some details about that plan here in just a minute. And finally, the commissioning authority must perform several other duties on the project, including functional testing of the building energy-using systems. At the credit level, there's a few different options. First of all, there's enhanced commissioning. And this is worth 3 points and requires that additional commissioning processes be put into place for these same building energy-using systems. Now, some of these requirements are reviewing contractor submittals, making sure that the training requirements are in the construction documents, that the systems manual has been updated and delivered, and that operator training has been delivered efficiently. Now, the second path under option 1 achieves all those same criteria in addition to some other elements. So what we're focused on here is integrating the building operational management system with the commissioning process itself. So we're looking at monitoring of points and assessing performance of those energy and water systems into the commissioning plan as they tie into the building automation system. And option 2, which is available in addition to either path under option 1, is envelope commissioning. Now this requires that the project team include the building's thermal envelope within the scope of commissioning, which is something that's new to LEED version 4. So we mentioned this a moment ago, but here we define owner's project requirements. This is a written document that details the ideas, concepts, and criteria that are determined by the owner to be important to the success of the project. And then we have basis of design, or BOD. This includes design information necessary to accomplish the owner's project requirements, including system descriptions, indoor environmental quality criteria, design assumptions, and references to applicable codes, standards, regulations, and guidelines. So while the owner maintains primary responsibility for the owner's project requirements, it's the design team, and primarily the MEP engineering side of the team, who manages the basis of design. And finally, we have the commissioning plan. This is a document that outlines the organization, schedule, and allocation of resources and documentation requirements of the commissioning process itself. It's essentially the governing document of the commissioning process on any given project. So here's that operations and maintenance plan. Now, the operations and maintenance plan needs several elements to it to be a successful plan. It needs to identify the sequence of operations, operational schedules or occupancy schedules, equipment runtimes, HVAC set points, lighting levels, minimum outdoor air requirements, seasonal, day of week or time of day schedule and set point changes, mechanical narratives, electrical narratives, preventative maintenance plan, and then provisions for ongoing commissioning of these systems. So here we see the strategies and terms. And right off the top here we see engagement of the commissioning authority early in the process. Now, not only is it very important so that the commissioning activities can be done effectively, and they don't require the commissioning authority going back and reviewing completed design work that they have no ability to influence, it's mandatory at the prerequisite level to engage that commissioning authority by the end of the design development process. Now that's so important, I'm going to say it again. Engaging the commissioning authority by the end of the design development process is mandatory at the prerequisite level.
The next consideration is the determination of those owner's project requirements and developing and maintaining the commissioning plan so it can be used to inform the design and construction activities related to commissioning, including incorporation of those commissioning requirements into the bid documents.
And then make sure that the performance has been verified before occupancy. So testing of these systems needs to happen before the occupants move in. Now there's a lot of equipment that's required by LEED to be included in commissioning, really any energy using systems. But there's also the opportunity to include some of those other types of systems. While they may not be mandatory, there's still tremendous benefit by including them in a quality control process like commissioning. And then building envelope commissioning itself is not mandatory, so it's not included at the prerequisite. But not only do you get a couple of points for including it, there's also tremendous energy performance value to the owner throughout the life of the building if they know that their envelope is operating properly. Now, one other thing I'll mention here is that there's a huge variety, really, of these responsible parties. So the buck stops with the commissioning authority. They really are in charge of the entirety of the commissioning process. Not only that, their reporting duties are directly to the owner so that there's no potential for lost information as that information is disseminated from the commissioning authority. Now, additionally, the general contractor, hugely influential in this commissioning process. In many cases, they're actually doing the tests as the testing is observed by the commissioning authority. And then in addition, we have the design team and then ultimately the owner. Now, there's some special requirements about who can, and importantly, who cannot be the commissioning authority on a project. So in this case, we break it into two general ways of thinking. So projects that are attempting just the prerequisite, they're not going for the credit. And then we talk about who can be the commissioning authority when the project is going for that additional credit for enhanced commissioning. So under all circumstances, the commissioning authority must have documented experience on at least 2 similar projects. Additionally, the commissioning authority cannot be the designer or the contractor on a project. However, at the prerequisite level, they may be a member of the same company, but they can't be directly involved. Now, there is a caveat here for the very small projects, defined here as those less than 20,000 square feet, where the designers or contractors actually can play the role of the commissioning authority. Now, for projects that are going for enhanced commissioning, there's some additional requirements for increased objectivity. It's the same requirements as above, But in addition, they can't be an employee of the design or construction firm. So while that makes sense for the prerequisite level requirements, it's unacceptable at the credit level. Additionally, the commissioning authority can't be hired directly by the construction team, although they can be hired by the design team. And finally, the small project exemption, where they allow the designers to perform the commissioning duties, does not apply when projects are going for the credit.
Now we'll hear from MEP Coordinator Ivan Christensen about commissioning. Ivan and his team worked on the Health Sciences Education Building in downtown Phoenix, Arizona. The project achieved LEED certification, and commissioning was crucial for this large-scale project.
The scopes that were commissioned on this project were the building envelope, mechanical systems, which include the heating hot water system, boilers, heating pumps, and recirculation pumps and whatnot. Also the chill water system, which heat exchangers, again, distribution pumps. We also did the domestic water system and lab plumbing systems, verifying piping, verifying equipment, water booster pump and whatnot. We also did electrical systems, lighting control system, verifying the lighting aspects, also the power systems with your SES, generators, switchgear, and also the monitoring of it. So all those items will be tested by the commissioning authority to ensure that they meet the basis of the design and the intent. So with the commissioning agent, obviously they're the ones that are in charge of leading the commissioning effort, having manuals put in place to describe the commissioning efforts, producing your pre-functional checklists for the subcontractors to start their pre-function, and then also providing the functional testing in addition to the verification and also ensuring owner training. With us, the general contractor, we're basically the central hub, I would say, for the information. We're like the liaison between the commissioning agent, the subcontractor, the owner. We help also facilitate the meetings and also ensure that we're getting the proper information for the commissioning agent to pass on to our subs, in addition to returning that information in a timely manner to the commissioning agent. And with the subcontractors, basically their responsibility is to implement the basis of design, install the equipment, and help confirm the operation of the equipment with respect to the basis of design and design intent. And then the manufacturers and vendors, they're always required at the time of startup to start up their equipment. Also, there's information for them to fill out as far as pre-functional checks, and they have their own startup checklist that they usually use. With the functional testing, it's a good way to really flesh out any installation and or design issues. Sometimes there's a design that might not quite work, and the commissioning agent will help flesh some of those items out.
And here's our sample question for the credit. Commissioning is the process of what? That a building's systems and assemblies are planned, designed, installed, tested, and operated and maintained to meet the owner's project requirements. So again, we'll just hold here for about 5 or 10 seconds. Feel free to pause the playback if you'd like a few more minutes to wager your response. And the correct answer is verifying and documenting. So jumping into our next prerequisite credit pairing around energy performance. Now, at the prerequisite level, it's called minimum energy performance, since all LEED projects need to meet that minimum because it's a prerequisite. And then at the credit level, it's called optimize energy performance. Now the intent here, they're very similar intents, but they vary just a little bit. At the prerequisite level is to reduce the environmental and economic harms of excessive energy use by achieving a minimum level of energy efficiency for the building and its systems. Now the reference standard here, certainly for this option that we'll talk about in a second, is the ASHRAE standard 90.1-2010. This is a hugely important standard within LEED as it defines the minimum energy efficiency requirements for projects. Now with option 1 here, it satisfies both the credit and the prerequisite. And this is an energy model, and it's worth up to the full 18 points available to the project. There's two basic criteria here. First of all, comply with the mandatory and prescriptive provisions of the reference standard. The second is to do an energy model to show energy cost savings. Now, keep in mind, we're not looking at energy savings directly, we're looking at energy cost savings. And then the points that are given to the project are based on the savings attained. And here we have option 2. This also satisfies both the credit and the prerequisite. This option looks at the ASHRAE Advanced Energy Design Guide series. And there are several different volumes in this series, and they address different building types. So you see here again the same requirement that the project must comply with the mandatory and prescriptive provisions of ASHRAE 90.1 2010. That's universal throughout this credit. But then the second piece here is to follow the prescriptive requirements of these ASHRAE Energy Design Guides that are specific to that project type. So office buildings smaller than 100,000 square feet, retail buildings that are bigger than 20,000 but also less than 100,000, K-12 school buildings, or larger hospitals. And now finally option 3, and this meets just the prerequisite. So to put that in another way, this satisfies the minimum energy performance requirements, but is awarded no points for projects attempting this credit prerequisite pairing through option 3 here. Now this option looks at the Advanced Buildings Core Performance Guide that's published by the New Buildings Institute. And again, we see that same criteria that the mandatory and prescriptive provisions of ASHRAE 90.1 2010 need to be put into place. But then to build from that, the project's required to do several things. So they need to follow the design process strategies. This is section 1 in the reference standard, and that dictates several elements of the design process itself. So it doesn't get into system performance requirements there. It really tries to shape the project through the design process itself. The next set of criteria here are the core performance requirements, and this is where the energy efficiency measures are listed. And further, the project needs to implement several enhanced performance strategies, and these are section 3 of the document, including supply air temperature reset around their VAV systems, economizer performance requirements, and then variable speed controls. Now, much like that last option, this only applies to a subset of buildings, although it's a broader distinction here. Projects need to be less than 100,000 square feet, and then they can't be healthcare, warehouse, or laboratory. So here's some strategies to think about around this credit. First of all, non-US projects are free to use their local equivalency to ASHRAE as long as it's US GBC approved as equivalent. Now a funny wrinkle here in this credit, the renewable energy. Now this does not count when assessing prerequisite compliance. So if a project their only energy efficiency strategy is renewable energy systems, they may not be able to meet the prerequisite. Even if they were net zero, they need to have a minimum performance of the building, regardless of where the energy is supplied from. Now at the credit level, that doesn't apply. So at the credit level, the project is able to take advantage of these renewable energy systems so that they can reduce their energy cost because for LEED purposes, you consider that energy to be free. Now, computer simulation is really the backdrop to this credit, and most efforts to quantify energy performance in complex buildings. Now, the computer simulation models, and there's dozens of types of energy modeling software, and we don't give preference to any eligible type here in this course, but using that computer simulation model allows the project to assess the energy performance early and implement cost-effective strategies, which could include major changes to the systems. And then finally, because we're talking about an energy savings, we have to have something to compare it to. So within ASHRAE 90.1 2010, specifically in Appendix G, is where they define what the baseline building should look like. And the baseline building in this case is one that just meets, but does not exceed, the ASHRAE requirements. Okay, so here we look at a formal definition of an energy model. It's a computer-generated representation of the anticipated energy consumption of a building. It permits a comparison of energy performance given the proposed energy efficiency measures against the baseline condition. And here we see the formal definition of baseline is the annual energy cost, again we see cost, for a building design intended for use as a baseline for rating above standard design, as defined in ASHRAE 90.1 2010 Appendix G. Here we defined a special type of system within a building called process loads. Now this includes office and miscellaneous equipment, computers, elevators and escalators, kitchen cooking and refrigeration, laundry, washing and drying, and any lighting that happens to be exempt from the lighting power allowance. Now, we talked about this credit being worth a lot of points, and here's where we see them really tallied up. So as you can see, there's some variety depending on whether it's a brand new building or a major renovation. Also, core and shell has its own element here as well. And then the projects are broken up by what rating system adaptation they're using to determine their level of points. So it should be relatively straightforward to navigate this information. Say you've got a major renovation that's saving, say, 19%, and it is a LEED for, we'll say it's a LEED for new construction project. Now that project would earn 8 points, corresponding with an 18% achievement for a major renovation. Now if it hit the 20-point mark, it would get 1 more point, or if it dipped below 18%, it would qualify then for 7 points. So here we have a simple example of a cooling load on a building. Now there's several things I want to point out. First off, the envelope dominates this building. It's a 10,000 square foot office building. Now, with buildings that small, it's not uncommon for the envelope to be the largest source of cooling need. And in this case, we see it broken down pretty specifically. So we have the roof, the walls, and the windows representing a good portion here of the envelope. But then the windows, the solar gain from those windows is really the driving factor there. And then a small impact from infiltration as well. Now lighting, also represented here at 19%, and equipment and plug loads at a whopping 22%. The final entry here that many people not involved with the designs of these systems, it might not occur to immediately, is the people that are within the space. Now, from your high school biology, you probably recall that living organisms produce heat. And that's, humans are no different. So in this example, people represent a whopping 12% of the heating energy that's generated in the space that needs to be offset by cooling. And our question: components of the building envelope that would be included in the energy model. So select 3. And the answers are 3, 4, and 5. So the roof, the spray foam insulation, and the windows. Now trim, it's almost exclusively aesthetic and certainly wouldn't have a significant energy impact and is excluded from the energy model. Water closets do have a performance impact on the building as a whole, but typically, unless they have an electrical component, wouldn't have an energy impact. Here we have our third prerequisite paired with its companion credit. Now the prerequisite is building level energy metering, where the intent is to support energy management and identify opportunities for additional energy savings by tracking building level energy use. The credit intent is quite similar, and that corresponds with the advanced energy metering credit. Now there's 2 types of projects that are addressed by this credit. First of all, we have core and shell, and then we have everything else. So those break down really in reflection of the fact that the building occupants are not well established for core and shell based projects. But for all projects besides core and shell, you'll need energy metering devices for all energy inputs that include electricity, natural gas, chilled water, steam, fuel oil, propane, biomass, or any other type of system that may be an energy input to the building. The additional criteria here is that the building commit to sharing this whole building energy usage data with USGBC for at least 5 years or until there's a change in ownership. Core and shell, the only difference here is that it pertains just to the base building system. So you would not be committing, say, the future tenants to sharing this information with USGBC. And then at the credit level, it gets a little more advanced. So installing what they call advanced energy metering, which we'll look at here in a moment, for all whole building energy sources and any individual end use that's 10% or more of total annual use. So if there was a chiller that used 15% of the energy on an annual basis in a building, you would need to individually submeter that chiller. Now at the core and shell level, again, we simply have some differences to understand that the core and shell building does not have a tenancy that's well developed. So advanced energy metering. These are the criteria here that would be required of anything that qualifies as advanced energy metering. So they need to meet all of these criteria. Meters need to be permanently installed, have a maximum 1-hour recording interval, more frequent is certainly okay, and transmit data to a remote location. Now electricity meters measure 2 things: consumption in kilowatt hours or similar unit of measure, and then demand in kilowatts. Now whole building electricity metering also should record the power factor if it's an appropriate building use. The data collection system itself has specific criteria about how it interfaces with the building automation system, and at least 3 years worth of data must be stored. This is important for a very specific reason, because it gives you at least 3 consecutive years worth of energy data to compare your current operation to. So say that you had a really hot summer at your building. It would be inappropriate the next year to record your energy performance during that same summer period and say, wow, we've reduced our energy use by 10%, and pat ourselves on the back. Well, it's hard to say that that was due to the building performance, or if it was due to a milder climate during that same period. So averaging the 3 previous years helps to normalize that data, so you're using better information. And now our question. Energy use data over time can assist in the identification of which following issues? And the correct answer is 3 and 4. So both of these 2 issues would have a likely energy signature associated with it, and if there's a professional looking over this energy data, especially comparing it to previous year's performance, they're going to quickly recognize that something's awry. Now here's our final prerequisite credit pairing around refrigerant management. So fundamental at the prerequisite level and enhanced at the credit. Now the intents here actually vary quite a lot. So at the prerequisite level, the intent is to reduce stratospheric ozone depletion. Now at the credit level, it includes that same reducing ozone depletion, but also supports early compliance with the Montreal Protocol while minimizing direct contributions to climate change. Now at the prerequisite level, the requirements are really straightforward. Don't use any CFCs, and then if there is an existing system, so in the major renovation case, that has CFC-based refrigerant, a CFC phase-out needs to be completed before building completion. Now at the credit level, there's 2 options. So first of all, don't use refrigerants, or only use what they call low-impact refrigerants. Those are defined here as having a global warming potential, which is an indexed value based on its relative impact to global warming of less than 50%, and most importantly here, a 0 ozone depletion potential. The other way is through a relatively complicated calculation. Now, this can use any type of non-CFC refrigerant. So we could use the HFCs or the HCFCs, depending on how they perform in the calculation itself. But the idea here is that you minimize the impacts from your refrigerant. And you do this in several ways. So the calculation itself, while we don't at all look at this rather lengthy calculation, it does include several variables from the HVAC system itself. So it looks at refrigerant type. So is it a CFC12? Is it an HFC? What have you in terms of refrigerant type? It also looks at the charge of refrigerant in each piece of equipment. So, and by charge, I mean how many pounds of refrigerant are in that system. Finally, it looks at the cooling capacity of the system. So a system that provides more cooling is given a little more flexibility in how much refrigerant or what type of refrigerants they're using. Now, LEED for retail projects have some additional requirements here for commercial refrigeration equipment. Now, not every LEED for retail project will have commercial refrigeration equipment, so this only applies where it's applicable. However, when it does apply, that commercial refrigeration equipment needs to accomplish 3 things. So the refrigerant must have a 0 ozone depletion potential. There's also some criteria around the average refrigerant charge and specific criteria around a leakage rate. So the leakage rate is, and strategies to address that are listed in the Green Chill document published by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Now there's an alternate here for LEED for retail projects that have a Green Chill Silver or better certification. They're assumed to already meet these requirements. Green Chill works to help food retailers in 3 ways. First of all, they help retailers transition to environmentally friendlier refrigerants. They lower refrigerant charge sizes and eliminate leaks, and encourage retailers to adopt green refrigeration technologies and best environmental practices. So here's the strategies we have in mind here for this credit. First of all, and where it's possible, design and operate the facility without mechanical cooling or refrigerant. Now that's terrific for buildings that can accomplish that, but say there needs to be a refrigerated storage area, or maybe you're in a hot climate and can't maintain comfort without mechanical cooling. So for those types of projects, or others where mechanical cooling is needed, the base building HVAC system should use refrigerants that minimize the direct impact on ozone depletion and global warming. There's a little bit of a workaround at the prerequisite level for projects that have existing CFC-based refrigeration systems. Now, there's no formula for whether a project will be given a pass on this, but they have the opportunity to represent to the LEED certification reviewer why it was not possible for them to complete their phase out prior to completion of the project. And finally, there's an exemption for HVAC in our systems, new or existing, that have less than half a pound of refrigerant. And one thing we also see here is the refrigerant types. So we have CFCs, HCFCs, and HFC. Now, we also represent halons here because there's some requirements around the fire protection systems that require no halons. But we list these three primary types of man-made refrigerants here. So here we look at our first definition of this credit, chlorofluorocarbons. These are hydrocarbons that are used as refrigerants and cause depletion of the stratospheric ozone layer. So here we illustrate the man-made and natural refrigerants and their relationship to ozone depletion and global warming. Now, we don't have halons here, as those are typically used only in fire suppression systems. Now, there's three types of refrigerants we discuss here, and their molecular stability is variable. So the CFCs and the HCFCs, to some extent, travel further into the atmosphere because they're more stable molecules. Once they reach these upper layers of the atmosphere, they deplete the ozone layer in addition to contributing to global warming. Now the HFCs are less stable molecules, so while they break down sooner and don't contribute to ozone depletion, they do have the largest impact on global warming. So again, we see, much like in other places within green building, a trade-off between environmental priorities. So here we look at the actual process of the CFC molecule in the atmosphere and how it breaks up this ozone. So the process begins with a chlorine atom being broken off of a CFC molecule by UV radiation. The chlorine atom then breaks apart the ozone molecule, or O3, resulting in an oxygen molecule, O2, and a chlorine monoxide molecule. A free oxygen atom breaks apart the chlorine monoxide molecule, releasing this chlorine atom and forming another oxygen, or O2 molecule. This gets us back to the beginning, where this chlorine atom can now break apart another ozone molecule and repeat this process up to thousands of times from just a single molecule. So what you can see very quickly here is that even a small amount of this CFC chemical that reaches the atmosphere has the potential to do a lot of damage. And now our question. Which of the following statements are true? And the answers are, CFCs are man-made, and fundamental refrigerant management is most concerned with ozone depletion. You could actually say fundamental refrigerant management is exclusively concerned with ozone depletion. And our next credit, EA credit, demand response, where our intent is to increase participation in demand response technologies and programs that make energy generation and distribution systems more efficient, increase grid reliability, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So there's two types of projects here, but first off, all projects need to design the building and equipment to allow participation in demand response programs. Now, there's two types of projects. Case one, where there is an existing utility demand response program, and case two, where there's not. Now, if there's a program, you need to participate in it for at least a year, and that's worth 2 points. Now, if there's no program, you need to give a call to the utility, say, we're wired for demand response programs as soon as you have one available, but there's no participation requirement. Here we have three very important terms related to this credit. First, demand response event. Now this is when the utility alerts building operators, typically through an automated system, that it needs those users to reduce their peak demand. Now peak demand is defined as the maximum electrical load at a specific time, or the maximum averaged over very short intervals, so over a minute period or something like that. Now, projects may have the opportunity to participate in what's called time of day pricing, where they have lower rates for their energy during those off-peak periods. Now this is called permanent peak load shifting, when those strategies are put into place that institutionalize these efficiencies. So maybe you're at an aluminum smelting facility. They're commonly referred to as very energy intensive. Now, shifting production so that those spikes in energy demand are happening during off hours would be a great way to reduce demand and, in many cases, reduce the energy cost of that building operator. And here's our question. Which of the following are benefits of demand response? And the answer here, 3 and 5. So projects can reduce their energy cost, and they can reduce reliance on fossil fuels. Now, that last one might not be quite so intuitive, but let me explain that a little bit. So when the system operators or the grid operators, those folks who decide which power plants to turn on and off, when they have lower peak demand, they're able to be more selective about what power plants they're bringing online. And in most cases, they will prioritize shutting down those most environmentally damaging systems. So your coal-fired power plants without sufficient controls, and those systems and power plants that are most polluting. So when those can be brought offline, there's huge benefit. And our next credit, EA credit renewable energy production. The intent here is to reduce the environmental and economic harms associated with fossil fuel energy by increasing self-supply of renewable sources. So the requirements here are pretty straightforward. So use on-site renewable energy to offset either 1%, 5%, or 10%. And there's actually a 3% mark for core and shell as well. Either using the energy model or using a default value based on the Commercial Building Energy Consumption Survey database, or CBEX database. Now here's the strategies to think about. So all project sites should be assessed for potential use of renewable energy systems. So maybe the site has great solar access. Maybe there's great wind systems that go through the area. Maybe there's even a tidal power option. Geothermal heating, low impact hydroelectric, and then maybe potential biofuels. Now, when looking at doing this, there's an important thing that building owners need to put into place. So a concept called net metering, which essentially allows the building owner to effectively spin their meter backwards when they're creating more energy than they're using. Now, most buildings that have renewable energy systems will use more energy than they generate during certain parts of the day. Now, when this happens, they are creating an energy demand from the utility, and they'll pay for that energy. Now, with net metering, they're able to offset those energy uses and not pay for and only pay then for the net energy that has been used. Now, while there's some strategies we list here that are great from an energy performance standpoint, they really aren't renewable energy systems as defined by LEED. So these don't count within this credit, and these are architectural features, passive solar, daylighting, or ground source heat pumps. Additionally, only certain types of biofuels can be counted. So the ones that are ineligible here are municipal solid waste, so you can't just burn garbage. Using forest biomass waste, so you can't clear a stand of trees and burn those up and call that renewable energy either. Or contaminated wood. So here we see an example of a photovoltaic array down in San Antonio, Texas. The graph you see in the upper left-hand side shows the estimated output of the solar array. It's a 200 kilowatt array, and it generates about 270,000 kilowatt hours per year. Now, this array also serves an architectural function in that it provides shading into the courtyard area of the building. Now, this array offsets about 25% of the energy cost for the building. So this array on this project would have earned the maximum number of points here under this credit. And now our question. Which of the following could be a source of on-site renewable energy? So be sure to select 3. And the correct answers are 1, 3, and 4. So biofuel from agricultural waste, wood chips from a mill, or low impact hydro. Now, trees cut from a forest, that's considered land clearing, and those would be ineligible. And then burning, that's municipal solid waste. That's also off the table for this credit. And our next credit, green power and carbon offsets. The intent is to encourage the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions through the use of grid source, renewable energy technologies, and carbon mitigation projects. So we have two references here, both overseen by Green E. We have Green E Energy and Green E Climate. The requirements, well, there's up to 2 points available here, and at the 50% mark, you get 1 point, and at the 100% mark, you get 2. And what this means is that at least 50%, if not 100% of the project's energy for 5 years, so this is a long-term commitment by the owner, is provided either by green power from the utility itself, is offset by carbon offset purchases, or is offset by renewable energy certificates. There's two types of projects here. First, projects located in an open market state that are essentially a deregulated state, where the building owner can select their power provider separate from their transmission system. So they basically get to choose who they're buying their energy from, even though it travels over the same infrastructure. And in a closed market state, there's typically just a single provider for any given location. Now, in an open market state, the idea is that you would be able to find a Green E certified power provider and buy your electricity directly from them as Green E certified. Now, but for those closed market states, your utility either has or doesn't have acceptable green energy programs. Now, if they don't, the project still has the opportunity to purchase what are called renewable energy certificates, sometimes called RECs, sometimes called green tags. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in a second. Now, what qualifies? For green power, that's Green E Energy certified energy or its equivalent. So it doesn't actually have to be certified, but it has to be certifiable. Now, on the carbon offset side, these need to be Green E Climate certified or equivalent. Now, these carbon offsets can be used to offset Scope 1 or Scope 2 emissions. Now, for renewable energy certificates, these also need to be Green E Energy certified or equivalent. So in all three examples here, there's the or equivalent caveat, which means that it doesn't really need to be Green E certified, it just needs to meet those criteria of the Green E program. The final point I'll mention here is that quantity is based on total energy use and not cost. So while we look at energy cost when we're talking about the Optimized Energy Performance Credit, we're looking at energy generation as a percentage in terms of kBTU, most likely, as a percentage for this credit. So here's the strategies. First, look at how much energy the building is going to need, and then investigate those green power options. So whether that's asking for proposals from many of the national resellers of renewable energy certificates, or if it's just going to utility and saying, hey, do you have a Green E energy program? Now, Green E, we've got their website here on the screen as well, has a lot more details about exactly what is and isn't Green E certified, but for the purposes of your Green Associate exam, just being familiar with these standards and not all the technical jargon that's behind them. Now, here's one way to think about renewable energy certificates, and for me, this really helped connect the dots. So conventional power and green power are both fed into the electricity grid. Now, once there, they're essentially indistinguishable. So as the electricity consumer, there's no way to know whether these electrons coming through your receptacle were generated using a conventional power or a green power system. But what you can do is you can consider those two equal the minute they hit the power grid, but then measure the green power as it's being put into the grid and generate these renewable energy certificates. Now, what this does is it essentially decouples the environmental benefit of green power from the energy itself and allows these RECs to be purchased and resold potentially as a commodity completely separate from the green power itself. And our question: which of the following is true for projects using both electricity and natural gas energy inputs? And the answers are 1 and 4. So both gas and electric use must be considered when attempting green power. Remember, it's not just electricity, it's percentage of energy. And then the project must purchase green power, carbon offsets, or RECs to earn green power.